have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. That one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
Areas that I'm familiar with would be like in the areas of immigration. So I understand that that is a significant variable when we consider sex trafficking and the women that come over here. So what came to mind was actually just a number of weeks ago there was this sting operation. I believe it was called Operation Dark Knight. So I had to remember the name because of the Dark Knight, right? So Batman. So it actually, what it involved was these women who were brought over under the auspice that they were going to work, and then when they arrived, then they were immediately as sex objects. And it was stated in there that there was something in the area they would be prostituted out for about 25 men per day. And this is recently, we're talking about within the last 2 weeks. So the sting operation, I believe that happened in the south, maybe around Georgia or something like that. But clearly when you talk about immigration and then sex trafficking is closely associated with that, only because when people are trying to migrate to the United States and they're told under this false pretext that there's job opportunities here, they get involved with certain circles, and when they arrive then they essentially are sold into slavery or prostitution. So yes, it's a major issue when you address certain communities, particularly immigrant communities. You think about maybe some sleazy sort of bosses and some sleazy sort of businesses engaging in this practice, but you'd be surprised how often this takes place, where you have immigrant groups who arrive, and in some sense I think they might have been informed that they're going to receive a certain amount of pay, and when they realize when they get here that it's nowhere near that, and again they're threatened that they're going to be reported to some authorities, and so then they have to accept whatever conditions are here for them. So many cases it could really expand any sort of occupation out there outside of any domestic sort of employment. So I think there is a significant amount of labor exploitation as well.
We've got 540,000 employees in our company, and the experts say the suicide rate is within the normal range.
However, he's asked his employees to sign a pledge promising not to kill themselves. And as for US computer giant Apple, well, it says it's investigating working conditions at Foxconn.
I would imagine at some level you'd have to look at some economic policies around the world that force people to leave their homelands and to jeopardize their safety. You're looking for a better future, so I would start with there and look at what the economic policies would be. I would also look at the demand policies, whatever. even though you have a significant amount of children that are being sexually exploited, at some level you also have a demand for it. So there's this high demand on the part of the United States, on the part of Europe, on the part of other countries in Asia that have this demand for small children. So I would look at both areas, look at the economic policies globally, and then also look at the demand and see, just address that as well. Look at policies that we could limit the amount of demand for sexual exploitation and labor exploitation.
I can't believe how these little kids are getting taken away from their parents, or even given away from their parents, and working these 16 hours a day. And not even to mention that they're getting taken away from another country, getting placed into another country, and having to work 16 hours a day in squalor. And when they're done working, they're going to have to, it's not like they go back to a bed. They go to a place with concrete and maybe a blanket if they're lucky, and then sleeping a couple hours and getting woken up again to do it all over again. And I had to mention that these kids, they're 7 years old. They don't know what's going on. You know, the parents are giving them away, and they pretty much have to accept it. It's, you know, they might put up a fight at first, but, you know, the human trafficker has taken them. They could almost like try to, it's coercion. When they're with them, they try to manipulate their mind, saying this is what you're supposed to do, this is what your parents want you to do. And, you know, since they'll be like, oh, I have to listen to my parent because that's what they're pretty much raised on, they're going to do the work.
Let's say that in some areas we are moving in the right direction. So when we fund certain programs, certain investigations, certain offices, whether they're law enforcement or prosecutors' offices, whether we fund the federal government to go after these employers, I think in those areas we are starting to move in the right direction. To the degree that there's sufficient resources, I would say clearly not. So there's clearly not resources in the way of the victims, right? And when we have those women that referred to in that Operation Dark Night, I mean, what's going to happen with those women now after they've sort of been rescued by the federal government? So we would have to have some sort of comprehensive services available for them. The prosecution of it, what are we going to do with the businesses that engage in this sort of illegal activity? So I think we need to offer a lot more services in that sense. I think we also need to think about it in ways that how do we as different nations address this problem as well. One of the problems is that we have our laws here within the boundaries of the United States, but clearly someone could go to another country and engage in child, prostitution. How is it that we have those countries also assist us in that process? So I would say that we are probably taking in the right step and going to the right direction, but what we need to be is clearly not there today. And in light that the 2011 resources are less than they were in 2010, so we actually have reduced the amount of federal funding that's allocated towards these programs. So then that becomes even more startling when you think about how big this problem is and how little attention is received.